IndyCar. It's always been America's premier open-wheel motorsport. Blinding speeds, legendary drivers, and thanks to the Indianapolis 500, the granddaddy of all long-time running auto races, with the celebratory drink of milk and victory lane being coveted the world over, IndyCar has a rich history of breathtaking races that literally keep getting better with every passing year. And I haven't really kept with it for like 20 years. There's a legitimate reason for that, but we here at Cruisers Motorsports are pretty well done with NASCAR, and since NASCAR and the Turner Broadcasting Empire have done their best to bury other great racing series like the WRC and the fantastic WeatherTech series with literally no coverage, which is a topic for another video, I've decided this year to get back into IndyCar since the television coverage is full on. What was it though that made me quit watching it in the first place? In the late 80s and early 90s, I was a huge fan. Rarely missed a race, and drivers' names like Andretti, Unser, Fittipaldi, Lyondike, Sullivan, and Rahal were as high up in my mind as racing gods such as Petty, Allison, and Earnhardt. The reason was the 1996 Indianapolis 500. And before we get into it and the mass political mess that this is, if you would, please reach over and click that subscribe button. Nothing helps me out more, as I'd love to do more episodes like this. And if you do or don't, I still seriously appreciate you taking the time to watch, my friend. Now, to tell the story of the split, I first have to tell this story. The year is 1991. Kart, or Championship Auto Racing Teams, is the banner in which all IndyCar racing is under at the time. I'm 13 years old when my adopted dad takes a childhood friend of mine and myself to I believe it was the Red Roofs N200. It was an Indy race at Mid-Ohio Sports Car Course just outside of Lexington, Ohio. There were literally almost 250,000 people in attendance. My friend and I were walking down the midway, which was already overcrowded, when two grown men on mini bikes buzzed by me so close they actually touched me, and then the lead bike actually ran into my friend ahead of me. They stopped to help him, and lo and behold, it was Mario and Michael Andretti. They apologized profusely and signed our tickets, then sent us to their hospitality tent where we each got a 10-foot-long racing banner. The following year, I got in a food fight with Bobby Rahal at the Roadhouse. Because of Mid-Ohio and the Cleveland Airport race, these guys, unlike my NASCAR hero counterparts, I actually got to make memories with. So understand how pissed off I was when I sat down to watch the 1996 Indianapolis 500 and recognized 3 whole names out of the 33-car field. For the next decade, the news sources couldn't get it right. Some say it was a walkout by the Kart teams, others say it was a power play by Tony George, owner of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the man behind what would replace Kart, the Indy Racing League. Only 2 decades later, when I finally see a resurgence in American open-wheel racing, did I really do the research as to what happened. So this is it. Probably the most brutal, cold, and heartbreaking civil war in racing history. This is the story of the Kart and IRL split that ruined open-wheel racing in America for the next 2 decades. Even though Kart had been around in some form or another before 1978, it was 1978 that racing legend Dan Gurney, along with Roger Penske and Pat Patricks, split from USAC and formed Kart Championship Auto Racing Teams. Of course, the FIA didn't recognize Kart as its own series, so a deal was struck with the SCCA, or Sports Car Club of America, to sanction the races, in turn allowing kart races to be listed on the International Motorsports calendar along with all the big dog races like Le Mans, Bathurst 1000, and of course, the Indianapolis 500. By 1983, Kart was recognized as America's premier open-wheel IndyCar championship. Thanks to ever-expanding TV coverage of races and support shows, IndyCar, NASCAR, IMSA and other forms of American auto racing saw a huge boom in popularity and inviting big corporate sponsorship names to the sport. Along with this rising popularity, IndyCar began to attract international drivers as well, and in 1989, when Emerson Fittipaldi, previously a Formula F1 champion, won the Kart Championship, it kinda opened the floodgates in open wheel racing in America with drivers like Arie Luyendyk, who had never won a kart race, and then goes out and wins the fastest Indianapolis 500 in history in 1990. And then there were drivers like Nigel Mansell, who came into kart in 1993 in his rookie year and won the title. Along with these international drivers, the series was also beginning stages of going international itself, with races in Australia and Canada on the schedule and exhibition races in Japan. Kart truly was on its way to challenging Formula One for being the premier open-wheel series of the world. Who knows where the series would have gone today if it hadn't hit a one-man wall at 200 miles an hour. And that one man was Tony George. Tony George was the president of the Indianapolis Motorsports Speedway and the driving force behind USAC. He joined the kart board of directors and did his best to try to ease the rising costs of running Indy cars. But as a non-voting member, he left the board and began making plans in 1994 for the IRL, or Indy Racing League. George was selling it as a cheaper alternative to kart, not to mention keeping American TV viewership interested by introducing an all-oval schedule, in a sense copying the now hugely popular NASCAR's format with a pro-stick-and-ball kind of aesthetic to it, in an attempt to appeal to the widest audience as possible. Tony George didn't believe that Americans wanted to see foreign drivers winning at places like Indy. After all, in the 1996 kart lineup, there were 10 foreign drivers that were all Formula F1 drivers. With the support of Indy Speedway and USAC, Tony George fired the first shot of the open-wheel Civil War on July 3, 1995, when his new IRL officials announced the top 25 drivers in IRL points would be guaranteed starting positions for the 1996 Indianapolis 500. In November of '95, kart teams, who didn't fire the first shot but were certainly the ones who declared war, already being locked out of the '96 Indianapolis 500, they decided to boycott the Indianapolis 500 and planned a race of their own with the US 500 at Michigan International Speedway the same exact day, looking to rain on the IRL's parade by stealing as much of its TV ratings as possible. Betting on fans following the known drivers' names and big sponsors they clearly recognized on cars, they failed to garner TV coverage because the lack of fans that showed up to Michigan International Speedway didn't meet the minimum numbers that TV required to broadcast a race. The race turned out to be a disaster anyways, having a 10-car pileup before the green even dropped, making kart look like a bunch of rookies.
The field, perhaps the most qualified in IndyCar history. World championships in both Formula One cars and sports cars. 7 IndyCar titles, 131 total IndyCar victories between them. Jimmy Vasser, who has won 3 of the first 5 races of the season and is the points leader coming into this race, will bring the field up to speed. And we have a crash in turn 4. A crash approaching the green flag, and many cars are involved.
Well, something has obviously gone wrong on cold tires. Maybe that might be the possibility. A half shaft braking. It looked like
Meanwhile, the real rookies actually put in a good, albeit a little slow performance at the Indianapolis 500, with IRL driver Buddy Lazier taking the checker easily with the 25-8 rule firmly in place. Kart would keep the US 500 on the schedule after that, but moved it as to not to interfere with the Indy 500 again. The split would continue, with no one crossing sides for another 4 long years, all the while both sides losing fans due to the uncertainty and utter confusion surrounding the split, and migrated over to F1 or NASCAR, both of which had already surpassed American open wheel racing in TV coverage and ratings. This had to gut Tony George, who emulated NASCAR to try to copy their success with an all-circle track schedule and drove fans right into NASCAR's arms, especially with as boring as the IRL races tended to be on circle tracks. To make matters worse for George, in 2000, Chip Ganassi Racing, with reigning Kart champ Juan Pablo Montoya as a driver, switched from Kart to IRL, and like a double agent made a huge hit from inside IRL's base at the 2000 Indianapolis 500, and well, yeah, they pretty well dominated it. The following year, Roger Penske came back to Indy, and with all Kart drivers, they dominated over half the top 10 positions. With the two biggest Kart teams switched back over to the IRL, lines had really began to blur again. Fans were just warming up to the possibility of having two major open-wheel racing series in the US. Imagine being a Kart/Penske fan and learning in 2001 that he had jumped ship to the IRL with all of his drivers and sponsors. Yes, Kart may have been gutting Tony George with the domination of IRL now by foreign formula drivers again. Kart would take a huge hit in the ratings because of it. In that same year of 2001, a key battle between Kart and IRL was to happen at the Texas Motor Speedway to see in two separate races who could put on a better, faster show. The IRL would put on the better show, the only show really. Since the Kart cars were more powerful, they actually went faster. Too fast, as a matter of fact, for most of the drivers in the field, as the G-forces were causing tunnel vision and disorientation during practice runs. Kart didn't do anything to slow the cars down, so the show could go on, and they simply ended up just canceling the race. Texas Motor Speedway, of course, sued Kart, and that's when the financial trouble really started to hit them. Andretti Green Racing made the switch to IRL as well. No doubt under pressure from the sponsorship that they wanted to see their cars and their names on the cars at the Indianapolis 500, not some poorly attended race somewhere else, and at the end of 2002, well, Kart, they filed for bankruptcy. And you think that would be the end of it, right?
Wrong answer.
Like two corporate rival giants, usually when one declares bankruptcy, it's the white flag of surrender, and will usually either merge with the bigger company or be parted out. After Kart's bankruptcy, though, team owners and sponsors limped the series under a rebranded name as Champ Car for another staggering 5 years. The bitter rivalry finally came to an end when Champ Car at last went belly up in late 2007 and merged with the IRL in 2008. That last 5 hard years that Kart/Champ Car went through, even though they died, did live to see the end of Tony George, as in that 5-year period had spent hundreds of millions on IRL marketing, races, teams, and the renovation to the Indianapolis Speedway to host a Formula One race that unfortunately didn't go any further than 2008. Tony George, like a victor that celebrates too soon, would actually be forced out by family members for his overspending the following year, which was just 2 years into the worst recession the world had ever seen. The board of directors was mainly George's family members that removed him in 2009. They appointed Randy Bernard the new CEO of IRL in 2009, and Bernard did a ton to bring people back to the sport, and among these things were securing races in much-needed demographic areas and help introduce the modern Dallara DW12 chassis for everybody to run, bringing down the cost of racing again. Bernard, due to a lack of driver/team respect, was fired and replaced, however, after 2011 by Mark Miles. By now, the family board at Indianapolis Speedway had all but dissolved, a company named Holman & Company taking over all IndyCar and Indianapolis Speedway operations that somehow Tony George was the director of, in a sense asserting himself as the winner of the split, albeit a delayed 3 years after the Champ Car/IRL merger. So, in an 11-year-old civil war between the IRL and Kart, who won? Sure, Tony George may still be around calling the shots, but he lost the circle track wars to NASCAR, reverting back to a road course-dominated schedule. And the series is still littered with foreign drivers that he didn't want there, so he seems to have spent all that money fighting for it to literally have no change over 2 decades later. The backers of Kart, who nobly fought to the bitter end and probably didn't fare any better financially, their sacrifice was the way of bankruptcy to make sure things didn't change in the end for IndyCar. But they probably aren't even around to enjoy it now. So the winner? The real winner? Well, undoubtedly, it was NASCAR, who garnered both the confused fans from the split, garnered even more by putting on a better circle track show than the IRL, and even having an event at Indy named the Brickyard 400 the whole time this was going on. The real losers out of all this, overly rich people having a dick-waving contest, were the open-wheel fans. Yes, IndyCar is again on the rise, but it has a lot less to do with Tony George and more to do with the sinking ship that is now NASCAR. For 11 years, open-wheel racing as a whole caused confusion and distrust in their own fan base, and the war was so bitter it's taken until now and beyond to gain its fans back, and even in the foreseeable future, IndyCar will not reach the charisma nor popularity it had with Kart in the early 90s before the war. Tell me now, what do you guys think? Whose side were you on? Did you shut off open wheel racing back then and turn something else on? Did you have something to add? There is actually a lot more detail involved in the split, and even some conspiracy theories that relate to NASCAR, but these episodes, they can only be so long, so I did my best to just stick to the major battles of the war and not get bogged down with the details. I've done a similar video concerning NASCAR. I'll link it at the end of this video. Consider subscribing. I'm a race car driver as well in the SCCA, and with wins amassed in both circle track and sports car racing, I do a lot of car stuff here in the channel that you just might enjoy. I'll leave the links in the description below for the Cruisers Motorsports Facebook group, Twitter, and linked at the end of this vid is the Cruisers Patreon should you want to contribute to said racing career. If you like the video, leave a thumbs up, and thanks for watching, my friends. And remember, friends, they're the family you get to choose. Don't have a civil war with them.